All right, Dr. Marcia, welcome to the Empower Network TV. I'm very excited to be interviewing you and hearing your story.
It's such a pleasure to be here, Amos. I've met quite a few people who have been joining already. I know a few of them and they are amazing people, which is why I joined in the first place. But as I meet more of them, I feel so much like I see pieces of the things that I've been admiring, wanting to lean more into, and also things that I could contribute. So that really lights me up.
Well, we're excited to hear, and I'm excited to tell the story of Lighting the Path, which is the title of the book behind you. And we're going to tell your story of involving your daughter, what sparked it, and also we're going to talk about your journey, please. And then we're going to talk about what you offer in the world and how you help women. So where would you like to start your story?
Where my story starts is really at the very beginning of my life, but it's such a long story that I'll tell you the last piece, which is the last decade or so. So about 11 years ago, my daughter was born in 2012, and we didn't know it, but she had 4 problems in her heart, and we only found that out after she was born. My husband happens to be a biology teacher, and so he counted fingers, got an extra finger, said, okay, when there's an extra finger, there's likely damage in an internal organ. So we're going to ask the doctors to check her out. And they found all of these problems in her heart and said, okay, this is not a minor issue. Your daughter likely has issues that will lead to open heart surgery. We took about 18 days to get a specialist to diagnose her as having tetralogy of Fallot. And here in Trinidad and Tobago, where we live, we don't have the capabilities to do surgery. So people wait for a team to come down. And there were people waiting since they were babies and they were in their 20s. They were 18 or 20. So we couldn't wait. They told us, wait until Emma started to deteriorate, and then we'd have to rush her to surgery. So we waited for 8 months. And when she was 8 months old, one day she just went clammy and cold and she turned blue. And they said, okay, she's at risk for stroke and seizure now. You need to get surgery within the next week. And we got the states, a hospital in the states agreed to take us. So we arranged our payments, we did everything, and we went to the states. Surgery went fine, but after the surgery, a doctor, instead of extubating her from the ventilator, she was breathing fine. And so they said, you don't need a ventilator. She's doing really well the same night. And they were pulling out the trach tube, but they dislodged the tube from her heart. It's crazy stuff. It should never have happened. But the fact is, it makes no sense quarreling about it now. So she flatlined. She bled out and she flatlined. And that machine for 20 minutes, just nothing they did. They cracked open her chest. They took her heart in their hands and they tried to get it to start. And it wouldn't start. So 20 minutes after, my husband and I sat on the floor. They had put us out and we sat on the tile floor and we held hands and we prayed. And we said, you know, God, we don't know what else to do. So give us back our child. And the minute the words came out, the machine started again. And so a miracle had happened because what wasn't happening for 20 minutes had happened like that. And Emma was back, but Emma wasn't back the way we thought we would get Emma back. She had literally stood for the first time the day before surgery. Now we had a child who was in a vegetative state. She had lost all of her senses. She had lost the ability to suck and swallow. And the doctors were telling us, withhold food and let her go. Put her in a home if you all refuse to withhold food, and just move on with your life because your child never is going to amount to anything. And your life is going to be hard. I'm so grateful that my husband and I have never seen things differently when it comes to Emma, because that's not a normal thing for many families in this situation. But we both knew we had prayed for M to come back and it wasn't about convenience. And so we asked to get put in rehab so we could learn from the rehab therapists. So we didn't know when we got back here if anybody had training. We didn't know how we would support her. And so we came back home and we started to just believe that she could get better and believe that we had, and we do, right? We all do. We have within us so much resilience and so much talent if we can tap into our intuition. And I'm an engineer and I don't know about tapping into intuition. I know about logic, right? So that was the biggest challenge for me, learning to trust heart overhead and learning to say, you know what are my strengths? I learn really well. I love to research. I never say no. The more you tell me I'm going to fail, the more I'm going to prove the opposite to you. And I'm stubborn, right? And all the things people used to tell me were the bad things about me, that I was brash and that I was so rough. They turned out to be the best thing about me for my daughter. And so I was glad I never turned into the girly girl that, you know, my mommy wanted me to be or any of those things. Because all of a sudden, exactly those characteristics were what made me the best mommy for Em. And what has changed is that Sean is my husband. I truly see him as my better half. He is the most patient, loving, self-sacrificing person. I really lucked out. And Emmy loves him more than me, right? And I love that she can have preference. So my mom came in one day and she said, Marsh, don't you feel bad? Because Em has 4 words. She says, Dada, it's her favorite word. And she says, hello, when she wants to remind us that she's not outside, so we should be in her room with her all the time. So she calls us back. She says, Auntie, which means auntie, and that's for the nurse and for me. And she says, Alala, which is I love you. And so those words tell you all you need to know. It tells me that Em is having a grand old life. It tells me that I'm doing a pretty good job, even though I'm good at beating myself up about all the gaps I see in where I wish I were as a parent, in what I wish I were doing with them. But you learn to give yourself grace too, right? I realize I'm good at giving other people much more grace than myself, and many of us are. And so this 11 years with them has taught me a lot, but the biggest teacher in that is Emma. The child who is still bedridden, who has no words, who is unsighted, is my biggest teacher. And I have a degree, right? This big PhD. But the best teacher is the child who cannot talk, walk, move, do anything. The one that people treat as if she is a semi-human.
I'd like to ask you, well, first I'd like to just point out, isn't it amazing that you were prepared for Emma? The way you came with tenacity and boldness, you were prepared for what you would need for Emma. That's fascinating to me.
It's fascinating to me too, because to tell you the truth, Amos, I pretended a lot of the time in the beginning. I'm not a fake it till you make it kind of person. I'm really, really brutally honest. I don't pretend that I have the answer if I don't, etc. I'll tell people I don't know. But with Em, I had a 5-year-old son when she was brain injured at 8 months old. And he was at her bedside. And so mommy couldn't break down and cry because mommy had to show up for him. And Sean was crying. Sean was a puddle because they had told him when he was alone. And we came back up after having Dunkin' Donuts because I was giving Brian a break from the hospital room. And we were on this high and we came in and he was alone and they had said to him, she's severely brain damaged and nothing, no kind of hope. And it was like somebody had taken her back to him when I walked in there. He couldn't even remember the words they had used. And he was just like, Marsh, this is what they said. So I looked at him. My mother was there with me, and my mother would go down a corridor, down the hall, and she'd cry in a corner, thinking that I didn't know. And he was crying behind the monitor. And my son was there, and I was pretending to always be the happy mommy. I had unlimited nursery rhymes and games and toys and nonsense to talk. And your mind in the background is saying so many things.
Where did you learn? Oh, you're connecting your audio. We got you back. Please bear with us. She's connecting the audio. Let's back up here, and we'll get back to the.
Hi, Amos.
Hello, welcome back. I wanted to ask you, Marcia, where did you learn this resilience? Where did you learn? You're obviously an overachiever. Can you talk about how that came to be?
I think I learned this. I learned this from past generations, I'm guessing. Nobody gives you these lessons. But where I come from is Trinidad and Tobago. And 2 generations ago, my grandparents didn't know how to read. They had never gone to school because they were indentured laborers who had come from India, and who had lost they had lost their names and their histories, and their culture was slowly seeping away, right? So that's what I come from. And the generation after my grandparents, these are people who sent their children to school with one dress and no slippers sometimes. And I remember my mother telling me stories about her big brother. And her father saying that one of her sisters was tall. She was 11 years old, and she was tall. So he had made a decision that because she was tall, it was time to marry her off at age 11. And I remember her saying, well, my big brother, who was in school and becoming a monitor, becoming a student teacher, said no to my mommy. So he told his mother, my grandmother, I'm going to figure out a way to help you to fund all of these children to get them an education, because an education gets you out of the hole that our family is in. And every one of that last set of children, I think that's maybe 8 of them out of 14, became teachers, became geologists, became professionals. This from people who took care of a cow, who grew vegetables and sold the vegetables in a stall to make money to send those people to school. So I think that's where the resilience comes from. It's from having enough love that even if you are struggling in your life, you can hope for a better future for the next generation, and you are willing to sacrifice your comfort now for their well-being in the future.
So what was it like then growing up with your family, with your parents? What did that look like for you guys?
It was full of love, but it was full of high expectations. And high expectations are debilitating if you don't know how to handle them. So for me, I thought that I would only be accepted or valuable if I excelled at school, if I always self-sacrificed, if I always volunteered to do whatever needed to be done. That was me through school. It became me through work. And I kept going and going and putting myself and my life off to the side to meet other people's goals and satisfy other people, because then I knew they would see my value and they would accept me. And I actually started to change in 2008 when my father died. So my father passed away in an accident 2 days after I had been laid off I had a 1-year-old son. And I was in a mess because he was the one person I knew would always be there for me, and he had disappeared. And I had no job, and I was thinking I could go back and get a job as an engineer, get a company car, get a big salary and all those things, but something was missing in here for me. And what was missing was fulfillment, because when I had kids, I had to give up teaching part-time. And I loved to teach. I loved to help other people to build skills that would help them to step into the next level of their life. And so I took a deep breath and I said, I'm not going back into engineering after that layoff. And I started over my career, 15 to 18 years into it, in a whole new career, which was education. And eventually by 2012, 4 years later, I got a job in the university being a lecturer, and I'm still there. That's 12 years later. And I love that job, but it's not all that I'm meant to be. So after my daughter got brain injured, I remember I never told my husband how broken I was, but 2 and 3 in the morning, I'd sit alone on the bed because he was in the room with her. And in the dark, I'd cry and I'd pray for God not to wake me up, because life felt like I was trapped and like I would live the same day over and over and over again. And then one day I opened my eyes and immediately the darkness came over me at 6 in the morning. And I was like, another day of back pain, another day of being terrified of what's going to happen with them. Is she going to have seizures? Is she going to have more pain from the dislocated hips? Is her heart or her brain going to give trouble again? Is it deteriorating again? And I don't have control over those things. And I love to have control. So I'm putting on the shroud of negativity and poor me-ism. And in the middle of my negative attitude comes Emma's laugh weaving through the house. And she's laughing the most delighted laugh. And this laugh finally gets through to me. For 7 years, this child had been patiently teaching the lesson and I hadn't been receiving it, but that day I received it. And it was, Mom, what have you lost that makes you so sad? Because I'm the one who lost everything and I'm as happy as a clam. She had woken up that morning. She was listening to the birds outside her window, and she was thanking God for another day to be exactly who she was and impact the world with all that she had. And she never once saw that there was something missing from her. I saw all that was missing from her because I think in developmental stages, and I see other children named Emma who are her age. And they're walking along and learning to do things with their moms and dads. And my child is still getting 1-year-old gifts, 11 years into her life. And I feel sad sometimes. You know, I feel so broken sometimes. And I grieve for what Em has missed and lost and what we have missed and lost. But she wasn't grieving anything. She said, I'm perfect just as I am. That's what she's saying to herself. And finally, I learned the lesson. My daughter knows she's enough. Why don't I? And why don't I know I'm enough? And so that became the reason that I started coaching people to step out of over-promising and over-committing and overwhelm. To step out of being too critical of yourself and breaking yourself all the time and being more supportive to everybody else except yourself. Because then you make space to live your best life, which is why you are here.
You mentioned being a lecturer, instructor is not what you're ultimately called to do. So coaching for you, what is your big win? What lights you up and what is small? Working with the women you work with, what's the most exciting aspect for you?
The most exciting thing for me is teaching, speaking, and coaching. because to me, it's all on one continuum. It doesn't exist by itself. It all comes together for me. And I love to just hold somebody's hand and say, I understand the pain and the doubt and the fear. And here's what I've learned, both cognitively. So here's what the research says. Here's what best practice says. But more than that, and most importantly, in my opinion, here's what experience shows. Here are the tools and the questions and the approaches that will change things for you. And here are the small steps that if you take them consistently, will change your life, because they've changed mine. In the space of 2 years, I became a coach. I became an author, a best-selling author on Amazon. And I'm still carrying a full-time job and being a full-time special needs parent to my daughter and to my 16-year-old son. And I should mention, I also run a special needs podcast. That's how I give back. It's called the Special Needs Parent Podcast. And I think I'm in the 3rd year now.
After the interview, would you mind dropping all your links in the comments here so people can find everything you're referencing? It'd be wonderful for them to be able to connect with you.
I'm sorry, Amos, but I didn't understand what you said.
Could you drop your links in the comments hereafter? Drop your links.
Oh, I'll be
to your
sure
website.
to.
Yeah,
I'll
that
drop
would be
those links.
awesome.
Sure.
I just want to say thank you for showing up today. Your story is so inspirational. You and your journey with Emma.
Thank you, Amos. I feel so motivated and so connected inside of the Empower Network, and I'm looking forward to becoming a well-woven in part of it.
Well, we're thankful you're here. We're thankful Emma's here because she doesn't even maybe know this, but she's inspired us today. You've inspired us, and Emma has inspired us, and Sean's inspired us. Sean's inspired us to stay true to who we innately are. And Sean is obviously a caring, soft, tender-hearted, attentive man. And so Sean's inspired us, as well as Emma, as well as you today. Thank you, Marcia, for this.
Thanks so much. And thank you to Shelley Beauchard for inviting me to the network as well. She's a wonderful lady.
She is a wonderful lady. She's in our academy too. We're thrilled to have her. So if you've been watching or listening to the Empower Network TV, you've been listening to Dr. Marcia tell us a story of her own transformation and what really matters in life. Thank you, Marcia, for being here. Thanks for being in the Empower Network TV. We're thrilled you're here, and I'll be messaging you after this to share the links with you.
Thanks so much, Amos. Have a good evening.